Hey, hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're very happy to have everybody here this evening. I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Stephen Rockauer, who is going to get us rolling. Take it away.
Well, thank you, Margaret. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Stephen Rockauer. I'm president of the Center for Healthy Maryland. I want to welcome everyone to the Center for Healthy Maryland and the Maryland Physician Health Program's lecture series, Lemons to Lemonade, Harnessing Our Strengths in Difficult Times. Tonight, we're going to be doing something slightly different than what we've been doing through the year. We're going to have a panel discussion. The panel discussion is a physician's uniquely common addiction journey, lessons learned. Our panelists include Dr. Martin RUSINOWITZ, our MPRP medical director, who will be joined by Dr. George KOLODER, who is well known in the addiction treatment field, Dr. Barry LUBIN, an expert in toxicology, and Michael Lufrio, the MPHP director of operations. Dr. Arthur HILDRETH, the MPHP medical director, will be moderating. You will hear what our panel members have to say about physicians struggling with substance use and what is available and helpful to support sobriety, recovery, and well-being. This will be a very informative and stimulating presentation, and we encourage you to put questions, comments, and feedback into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Not the chat box. Look for the little box on the bottom as two little balloons labeled Q&A. We'll have some time at the end of the presentation to answer and discuss your questions. Let me also mention that the Center for Healthy Maryland is presenting a dinner and show with the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra on April 13th, excuse me. This is entitled Prohibition and the Roaring Twenties. Should be a great show. Get your tickets now while there's still something available by going to healthymaryland.org/events. You can also invite any medical students that we'd like to have you come with it. And while you're there on the Healthy Maryland website, be sure to hit the orange button in the upper right-hand corner that says Donate. We always need your money. Help continue and expand MPHP's valuable services to the Maryland community of medicine. Now I'll turn it over to Dr. HILDRETH to introduce the rest of our speakers.
My name is Arthur HILDRETH, and I'm Medical Director for the Maryland Professional Health Program. Tonight's program will give you information about the Maryland Professional Health Program, particularly as it deals with addictions in healthcare professionals. We will inform you of the development of the science of toxicology, the diagnosis and treatment of addictions, and give information on how to deal with professionals who have that problem. Addictions are roughly estimated to affect 16% of the general population, and of that, 2/3 have alcohol use disorder. The percentage of physicians is estimated to be approximately the same or higher. However, management and treatment of this through existing health programs result in 75 to 80% recovery of those afflicted. So it's possible to substantially change outcomes with appropriate diagnosis and treatment. In this treatment, psychiatric problems such as depression and bipolar disorder frequently accompany addictions. So it is important to recognize and treat these conditions because without their recognition and treatment, the likelihood of success is adversely affected. As Dr. Rockauer had said before, our panel consists of Dr. Martin RUSINOWITZ. I won't bother to give the qualifications since Dr. Rockauer did that before, but Dr. Martin RUSINOWITZ will describe his experience as an addicted physician who was a participant in the health program, and he will provide the central focus for our discussion. Dr. George KOLODER an addiction psychiatrist, will describe present-day addiction treatment, particularly for physicians. Mr. Mike Lafrio will describe the history and operation of the program for Maryland. Dr. Barry Lubin will describe the use of toxicology for diagnosis and ongoing treatment of participants in treatment, a necessary component of any interventions. After that, as Dr. Rockower mentioned, there'll be question and answer and discussion period, which I hope will be particularly valuable to all of us. Thank you. Now, I'd like to first start with Dr. Martin RUSINOWITZ.
Thank you, Art. And it's, I'm getting over my COVID cold, so I'm trying to eliminate my Barry White voice. It really is an honor to be here. I have told my story, and I called it Uniquely Common because when I was going through it, I thought it was very unique and special and particularly painful and difficult. But the thing that recovery has provided for me is to see that many other physicians have the same issue. And unfortunately, so many, absolutely so many go without any help. Art gave some numbers. The number of physicians in this community, in our state, who suffer from a substance use disorder is incredible compared to the number that we actually see in our programs. And if this does nothing more than get one of them to get help, then it's been a successful meeting. So I want to start out, and I've often thought about why I became an addict. I think my brain biology is different than most earthlings. I think I was an addict long before I took my first drug. But my history goes back to when I was a resident in neurology in Chicago, and I had a root canal done. And the dentist said, here's some Tylenol number 3, Tylenol with 30 milligrams of codeine. He said, if the pain's real bad, take this, otherwise take some Motrin. Well, I got home and took one of the Tylenol number 3, only one. I was afraid to take 2 because the opiates just had such a horrible image in my mind. And I took one, and it was the best experience of my life. I mean, the grass was greener and the life was good, and it made me feel incredibly good. Everything I did was positive. It was an extraordinary experience, and I realized then that I'm not going to take these while I have pain. I'll save these for later on. That's the first sign of an addict, saving the drug for later on. And that's what I did. And I would take, one of them either with a glass of scotch, a joint, or anything, or alone. And for the entire evening, life was good. If we were with other people, I was Mr. Joke and Mr. Personality. And if I was alone, I enjoyed just staring out the window of our flat onto Fullerton Avenue in Chicago. But when the pills were gone, they were gone. And that was the end of it. And years later, I had forgotten, but my brain had not. I was sitting in my office as a neurologist in Rockville, Maryland. And as part of the practice, it was a referral practice. So virtually every patient I saw was referred by another physician. And I would dictate a letter to that physician, thanking them for sending the patient. And then I would go on to what I think was wrong and what should be done. And I hated doing that. I loved playing doctor, but that got in the way. So I would leave the charts to dictate for the end of the day. And sometimes it would be, 2 days or 3 days. And by the weekend, I would try and burn through this stack of dictations. And I was alone in the office. It was a big practice. I was alone. I would get headaches. I hated doing it. So I take butalbital, Fioricet, or Fiorinol, which is butalbital is a short-acting barbiturate. I never felt anything from it, but it did get rid of the headaches. But I obviously was taking them every day and every time I was in the office. And eventually I ran out, and the only thing to take was Fioricet or Fiorinol with codeine. And I hadn't even remembered what happened in Chicago, but I took one, and instantly I was back in my apartment in Chicago. I was loving life. I enjoyed dictating the charts. It just was, even when I would dictate, it sounded better than without the drug. I don't think the dictations were very different. I've compared them, but I almost enjoyed hearing myself talk. It sort of melted away the imposter syndrome and made me believe what I was saying. But then, so I really became a vocational drug addict. People are always referred to as recreational drug addicts. I did not take the drugs at night or when I was not dictating. But with time, I developed a tolerance and a dependence, and ultimately I was taking the pills all the time, mostly at work. I would take them at night and at weekends when I was not dictating or working to not get sick, but I would take them when I dictated, and then I started taking them during the day at work. Eventually, I had to run out of my supply. There were none left in the office, so I started writing scripts. Again, something that's in my mind is so heinous and so horrible, but I was not alone. So I would write a script for, and by that time, my drug of choice was hydrocodone, Vicodin, just another opiate. And I would write a prescription, and I'd make up a name, I'd sign my name, and I always gave number 30, dispense number 30, and that way I knew it was mine and not being abused by God knows who. And with time, I traveled all over the metropolitan area. It's a luxury to live in the DC area because there are 3 jurisdictions, and early on, I would deliberately plan which pharmacy I was going to so I would not repeat it. My wife commented at the time that I seemed to know Virginia and DC so well, even though I didn't live there. And that's because I had run all the pharmacies and knew where every CVS was. And I'd walk in the pharmacy, give them the script. They had a big sign that says all controlled substances will require ID. I passed hundreds of these. I was never asked for an ID. With time, I got sloppy, and I was taking about 50 Vicodin a day, and my life was unmanageable. Everything revolved around getting my drug. I still would only take 30 at a time or dispense 30, so I would go to 2 pharmacies a day to get 60 of them to have a little cushion. I would go in the morning before making rounds in the hospital, so 6 in the morning. And then when I would leave the office in the afternoon to go back to the hospital, I would swing by another pharmacy and I'd wait there for it. And of course, I asked for generic because I wanted to save some money. And, I did this twice a day. It was just part of my routine. At the same time, in the hospital I was at, I was chief of neurology. I was on executive committees and making decisions about throwing out physicians who maybe got a DUI or had violated some ethical problem. And it was just a horrible feeling. My life was so unmanageable. At the time, my wife was asked to deliver a paper, and she was an academic in Dublin, in Ireland. And I went. And went along, and we were there for 10 days, and I had to bring enough Vicodin for 10 days. I went with 2 mayonnaise jars, the big ones, filled to the brim with Vicodin. Vicodin's a big pill. So for a while, I went to 3 pharmacies a day just to collect enough. So I went with hundreds of these. And my life was in such disaster and disarray that it never crossed my mind that what would happen if somebody in customs just opened my suitcase and there were 2 mayonnaise jars full of narcotics. I would have gone straight to jail. And other things at the height of my addiction, I always was trying to withdraw from the drugs and get off. So I would always do it on vacation because the most sacred thing in my life was my practice in neurology. So every time we went on a vacation, I was going through withdrawal. My wife thought I was allergic to vacation. She thought I was bipolar because I was Mr. Wonderful, nice guy and sociable when I was in a work-related thing. And when I was with her alone or on vacation, I was just miserable. I even tried getting to become an alcoholic. I knew patients who had abused narcotics, and they would come in and ask for scripts, but I didn't know any doctors who did this. And it was so isolating. I tried to become an alcoholic. I mean, I drank too much, but it never did the same thing. I would still need to take the pills, or I would be miserable and withdrawing. I even got cocaine from a friend. I knew that there was Alcoholics Anonymous and Cocaine Anonymous. And if I could just get one of those acceptable addictions, I could get help. None of them worked. I had been seeing a psychiatrist at the time because of depression, unrelated, but certainly in part related to the cure of the opiates. And he was a Freudian guy. I was on the couch lying there, and I decided to tell him what's going on, because I would tell pills on the way to my therapy session so I could perform for him. And I told him about it, and immediately he had me sit up. He was done. He made it clear that he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't treat addictions, and we are done. You know, I'd established a relationship with this man twice a week for 2 years, and that was it. He sent me to somebody at Georgetown to help my addiction. I went there and paid cash. I didn't want a record. And this doctor, he said, you probably need to go away to get real help, but if you don't want to do it, we'll try and do it on our own. He wrote me a prescription for 50 Vicodin when I left his office, because I needed enough to start a weaning schedule. I remember walking into that pharmacy in Georgetown University Hospital, the outpatient pharmacy. I was so nervous, I thought I was breaking the law, because a prescription, a valid prescription for 50, it was a new experience. Anyway, I worked with him and I managed to get clean, if you will. I was a dry drunk, as is often said in AA. I was not taking the pills, but I was a miserable SOB for 3 weeks. And then I was back. I didn't see him because I didn't think it would help. And, you know, this just went on until eventually I got busted. I got sloppy going to pharmacies. I would make up a name literally in the parking lot. I'd fill the prescription out. And one day I was going to a pharmacy in Rockville near my office, and I had gone there too many times. Early on, I would not go, but with time, I just went because I needed it. And I went in and they asked for my address. I hadn't put it on the script. And I remember I said, I passed the street in Rockville called Argyle Street. And I said, or I made up a number. I said 702 Argyle in Rockville. And, well, she lived at 704 Argyle in Rockville, and she knew that I was not her neighbor. But she thought she had no inkling that I was the doctor writing the script. She thought I was just another guy in the street passing bogus scripts. She called my office to tell them of her suspicions, and she described what I looked like. And one of my partners, who was somewhat suspicious of my behavior, heard the story, called the police, and things unfolded rapidly. I was in the back room of the police department in Montgomery County, Maryland, where they handcuff your hands to these tables. You see them on Law and Order all the time. I didn't have handcuffs, but I sat there, and the detective said, if you have a problem, Doc, tell us now. We'll get you help, and you'll never see me again. He said, but if you don't, and he knew what was going on, if you don't, your life will be miserable. And I accused him and the people in my office, and I was really a jerk and antagonistic. And when I left, he said, he gave me the time I had to appear in court. It was a felony charge. I didn't even know the difference between a felony and a misdemeanor. Now I watch Law and Order, so I understand it. And he said, you need an attorney. I said, well, I have the guy who closed on our house. And he said, no, you don't need a real estate attorney. You need a criminal attorney. You're being charged with a crime, and you can be jailed if you're found guilty. So again, I went on my way. For a while. I paid 2 very expensive lawyers, both lying to both of them. I had one lawyer, was the most expensive I could get in Washington, D.C., and he said, well, Rockville is an old boys club. We need somebody there as well. So I had 2 attorneys. And anytime I talked to either one of them, the bills, the charges, and I must say, and I'm very cynical of it, but they knew I was guilty, but they were no rush to have it surface, because they were charging by the hour and could keep going. Anyway, one of my partners in the practice I was in confronted me. He actually had Mike Lafrio. At the time, I really thought he was a jerk. He called while I was in the attorney's office and said, we know what you're doing. You need to go and get help. Here's a phone number, and when you get out, call me. Click. And it was tough love, but he gave me the name of the Farley Center in Virginia, where I was for 12 weeks. At the time, most docs went away for 12 weeks. They told us it only was a 30-day program, but it took 60 days to get doctors' attention. And before going, a unique thing happened that my bosses, the people in the practice I was in, at the time, this was the largest single specialty practice in the country. There were like 17 neurologists, and unanimously they met with me and they said, this is no different than a heart attack. Go and get healthy, and when your doctors say you're healthy enough to come back, your job is here. I went off to Farley. I was the only person there out of dozens who had a job to return to. And my life was turned around. I went there for 12 weeks. I learned that I just have to do what they say and things will get better. I no longer gave my opinion. I would often say, in my mind, I think we should. And they would say, stop it. If your mind got you into this mess, just follow what we do. I did well. I was scared to death. My license was on probation. That's a whole nother story that cost fortunes of another attorney to represent me before the board, and another attorney after that to represent me before the board in DC, because they eventually found out. But with time, I got better and I went back to work, and my life was turned around. I learned to handle stress other ways. I learned to get pleasure in other ways without the pills. I must say things couldn't have been better. I mean, it showed because after completing my 5-year contract with MedChi with the same program, run at the time, Mike, I won't say too much, but Mike saved my life. I continued on. I was asked to be a member of one of the committees, and with time, I became chair of the committee. And then ultimately, I ascended to the role I'm in as medical director of one of our programs. We have 2 programs. Briefly, one is a board program, which I take care of, and Art takes care of the non-board program. And, even the skills it taught me were life skills. Recovery is not just stopping drugs or alcohol, whatever. It's learning to have a new way of life. And it did for me. I also learned that I was burning out. Before the term burnout was fashionable, I was burning out from private practice, and I was angry at patients and the whole managed care thing. Life was tough. And I got a job at the FDA. I realized that I had skills to do other things. And ironically, after being at the FDA for a few years in neurology, I learned that there was a controlled substance staff, which I ascended to and became, reasonably high up in that program. And I was now evaluating and regulating the same drugs that I abused. And just say at the time, we had talked about adopting a child. We never did. I was so focused on myself that I was not ready for that. And but we adopted a girl. She's now a wonderful kid. She's going to graduate school, and life couldn't be better. And even at the FDA, it's striking how in this country, I don't think it's the same elsewhere, we are so forgiving and understanding of other people. With this history, I needed a higher level of top secret clearance at the FDA to evaluate counterterrorism drugs. It has to be in a certain room, and it's really spooky. And I thought, this is the end of it. They'll finally blow my cover. And I answered things honestly, told them about the court appearance, the whole thing, and I got the clearance. It's remarkable. So I'm going to stop now because I will ramble on. And I just want to say that there is such a better way to handle life. And if there were just some way to drop folders from helicopters or something, like we sometimes do to enemy people to let them know how to get help, I would do it. And so I'm going to show how we give it back by going to the next speaker, and I'll be back. Thank you.
Marty, thank you very much. You know, what can I say except thank you? The next person is Dr. George KOLODER, who's an addiction psychiatrist who will describe present-day addictions treatment, particularly for physicians. I hope that guy got that right, George.
Yeah, it's thank you, Art, and thank you to Marty for having the courage to go public with the story, which I certainly found inspirational, and I consider myself fortunate in that I've heard similar stories from other physicians who I've worked with, and based on what Marty said and my other experiences, I'm going to focus my comments on three areas. The first is to look at what's behind the high recovery rate that Art mentioned, the recovery rate from substance use disorders that we see from physicians as a group. And I think that there are two particular elements that contribute to the success of treatment of doctors in general. The first is that in Marty's case and other physicians, is the use of an effective evidence-based treatment approach. Some of you might be familiar with William Halsted, who in the struggled with addictions in the early 1900s, and programs like this didn't exist. But Marty and other physicians have access to many excellent programs. And let me just take a moment to tell you that that the programs have three phases, beginning with an initial stabilization phase involving the intensive use of psychotherapy, especially group therapy, and medication when available. In Marty's case, this involved the residential rehabilitation program, but it can also be accomplished in an outpatient setting. The next phase is an extended continued care treatment at a less intensive level. And during both of these phases, the first two phases, the patient's being introduced to the recovery support community in preparation for the third phase, in which the patient ends their involvement in professional treatment and continues to actively manage their chronic disease within the structure of one or more non-professional mutual help programs, such as a 12-step fellowship or a secular group, such as Smart Recovery. So programs like that are the first element. The second important element that I think is essential is the implementation of a system of accountability, and such as is seen in the MedChi rehab program, and that's where Mike Lufrio will tell you about that. That program tracks the adherence of physicians to the treatment program. This involves regular personal meetings, and also toxicology screening over a period of 5 years. And you'll hear more from Dr. Barry LUBIN about the toxicology screening aspect of the monitoring. So that's the first thing I wanted to focus on. The second thing I'd like to focus on is the way in which the treatment of physicians differs from the treatment of people with similar substance use disorders, but who are not practicing clinicians. There are occupations such as airline pilots or bus drivers who, when they're addicted, there are public safety considerations. There are other occupations, such as pharmacists, who have unusual access to addictive substances. But practicing physicians have a rare combination, excuse me, of both of these situations. They have unusual access to addictive substances that they can prescribe. But they also, because they're treating patients, there are public safety considerations. Because of that, physician wellness groups, such as the MedChi Rehab Committee, has to consider both public safety and the interests of the individual physician. And sometimes this might compromise the confidentiality that's the usual bedrock of our clinical work. But managing to respect both of those areas is a skill that I think takes years to develop. And I think the MedChi committee is an excellent example of one in which that's done at a high level of expertise. I'm going to conclude my comments by focusing on the third area, about how even with the high rate of recovery that we've seen among physicians, what could be done that would lead to an even higher rate of success? And the one area I would focus on is on people such as Marty, who struggle with an opioid use disorder. And I would argue that these folks are often handicapped by being deprived of the use of state-of-the-art treatment. Now, when Marty saw treatment and recovered, the medication that is now the state-of-the-art, namely buprenorphine, more commonly known as Suboxone, was not available, so he didn't have it. But it is very available now, and in my view, it is sadly often not used for physicians. There is, I think, a rather thinly evidenced argument that buprenorphine causes mild cognitive reductions that would not allow physicians to practice at the highest level. I think that the evidence for that is really slim, and I hope that over time that restriction it's already been, it's not an absolute restriction, but I hope it'll be relaxed even further so that physicians can have access to the same medications that non-physicians do.
Thank you, George. That was very helpful. And I think you could have gone on for much longer because there is so much more available as time goes along. We'll now turn to Mike LaFrio, who's Director of Operations for the Maryland Professional Health Program, who will describe the history and operation of the program for Maryland.
Great. Thank you, Art. Thank you, Marty, for a really wonderful story. And thank you, George. The physician health movement may have begun with the phrase, "Medice cura te ipsum," physician, heal thyself. This classic proverb has been used in literary texts from at least the 6th century before the Common Era. The moral is thought to be that physicians should care for themselves to better care for the illnesses of others. Not sure that's entirely correct. A little closer in the modern era, 1973 to be exact, the American Medical Association's Council on Mental Health first focused national attention on what became known as the sick physician. Release of a report that acknowledged substance abuse as a frequent problem. It recognized the denial common in affected physicians and an entrenched conspiracy of silence within the profession itself. The report recommended persuading the impaired physician to get help. It also urged organized medicine to be cognizant that some of their colleagues suffered from alcoholism and drug abuse, and organized medicine should be prepared to help. With that, state programs began appearing across the country one by one. In Maryland, a little closer to home, in the beginning, the Maryland Physician Rehabilitation Committee was formed in October 1977 at the semi-annual meeting of the Medical and Chirurgical Faculty of Maryland under the direction of Dr. James Davis, then the president of MedChi. Some of you may be familiar with the name Medical and Chirurgical Faculty of Maryland. That was the name of the society in 1799 when it was formed, and chirurgical simply was a term for surgical at the time. It comes from two Greek words that mean handwork. The early planners of the Physician Rehabilitation Committee included Doctors Joseph Berman, Maxwell Wiseman, Charles Bagley, Joseph Chambers, and James Davis. The first chair was Dr. Jerome Collar, an internist from Pikesville, who was a former chairperson of the Commission on Medical Discipline. He could no longer accept physicians with treatable illnesses losing their medical licenses in Maryland. In 1978, the first full year of the committee, they primarily worked with primary care practitioners who had physical problems because of long-term alcohol abuse. Under Dr. Collar, groups were formed in Baltimore, Bethesda, and on the Eastern Shore. Teams traveled from one end of the state to the other to try and help their troubled colleagues. Those team members were doctors on the Physician Rehabilitation Committee, including Dr. Robert McDermott, Dr. William Dixon, Dr. Leo Hennigan, Dr. Timothy Barilla, John Griswold, Dr. Robert Kent, Dr. Patrick Adams, Dr. Edson Moody, Dr. Edward Kitlowski, Dr. Michael Bisco, Dr. Michael Hayes, Dr. Richard Anderson, Dr. Irving Cohen, Dr. Robert McDaniel, and Dr. Martin Velaski. They all devoted hours to the recovery of their fellow physicians. In the early part of the program's existence, growth began, a program developed. In the mid-1980s, Dr. Michael Hayes, an original committee member, became chair. He pushed for and was able to get a part-time medical director hired in 1985. The position became full-time in 1986. Funding at that time came from a $10 assessment on medical society membership dues and from a yearly donation by the Medical Mutual Liability Insurance Society of Maryland. From the beginning, the services of the program were available to all licensed and non-licensed resident physicians and medical students in the state. Membership in MedChi was not a requirement. 1990 saw significant change when the MedChi Executive Committee requested that the state legislature, as part of a licensing fee on all physicians, include a $50 pass-through to support the physician rehabilitation program. The bill, supported by the chairman and executive director of the Board of Physicians, passed and was signed into law by the Governor William Donald Schaefer. These resources marked a new era in the activities of the physician rehabilitation program. In 1992, the law was amended to allow for the supporting of peer review activities of the medical society. The final decade of the 20th century saw the program moving straight forward. The late 1980s had seen a time of conflict between the board and the program, some board members seeing illness as prima facie evidence that a physician was incompetent. By 1990, the relationship between the board and the program had found a fulcrum point of being collegial while recognizing that we came to the same place, helping physicians and protecting patients, just from different perspectives. Also during this time, the program was an active participant in the founding of the Federation of State Physician Health Programs, including serving on the inaugural Board of Governors. A new outreach effort at that time saw the development of a monthly newsletter, Straightforward. A newsletter in a tabloid style was mailed to every physician and hospital in the state of Maryland. Ahead of its time in many ways, Straightforward covered issues, in addition to physician health and well-being, that included topics such as physician-assisted suicide, the legalization of marijuana, professional burnout, and physician career satisfaction. Each issue had a dialectical, and book reviews were frequently included. Over time, the newsletter was reduced to a quarterly offering, and eventually a decision to redistribute funding led to a loss of staff, and the ability to continue the newsletter ceased after a 6-year run. In the first decade of the 21st century, the name changes, but the mission remains the same. Our program moved into the next millennia with a strong commitment to helping physicians and other healthcare professionals. Changes at the Board of Physicians and philosophical differences brought the challenges to the program that in 2004 led to the Board of Physicians deciding to use the physician rehabilitation funds to begin a program of their own. Since the board continued to use the name physician rehabilitation, our new MedChi program became the MedChi Maryland Physician Health Program. With support of MedChi, the program continued to provide services to physicians and allied health professionals. Maryland hospitals, with the endorsement of the Maryland Hospital Association, provided financial support via payment of fees to the program. These fees establish a relationship between the program and a hospital, allowing us to provide a coordinated approach when assisting healthcare providers. We also provide an annual presentation on a variety of topics, including physician impairment, burnout, and wellness. We present to medical staffs, MECs, other leadership groups, and pretty much any other group willing to listen to us. Participating in the program allows hospitals to meet Joint Commission requirements for a non-disciplinary process to assist impaired physicians. The support from almost all the hospitals in the state allowed the program to continue providing service to Maryland physicians and allied health professionals. Maryland's hospitals are an essential ally to our programs. Looking at our current chapter, we look to new horizons. In 2009, the Board of Physicians put out an RFP seeking a contractor to operate the Maryland Professional Rehabilitation Program. The MPHP, now under the 501c3 affiliate of MedChi, the Center for a Healthy Maryland, had found sound footing and developed a plan. We would have two programs, the private and confidential physician health program, and we would bid on the RFP created by the board for board-referred physicians and professionals. The contract was awarded to the center. The first participants in the MPRP came on January 2010, and the files of the board-referred participants would be separate from the physician health program files and would be the property of the Board of Physicians. I'm compelled to mention that sadly, during this part of our story, we suffered the loss of Dr. Stanley Plattman. Stan was the chair of the Physician Health Committee for 25 years and the first medical director of the Maryland Physician Health Program. He was a dedicated physician, psychiatrist, researcher, and friend to the cause of physician health. We felt his loss deeply. I could go on and talk about my urgings to Stan to write his memoirs, something he never did that I thought would have been interesting. That's another story, and I probably won't tell that to you, about his growing up in London during the Blitz, about his internal medicine training at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa, where he spent much time in the bush, operating under torchlight, often doing amputations from hippo and crocodile attacks, or his psychiatric training in Belfast during the Troubles, or working with the World Health Organization doing reviews of the mental health systems in South Africa, where he eventually was kicked out of the country. He was declared persona non grata because he allowed blacks to ride in the front seat of his car. He did get back in and he did more work in South Africa. But Stan has a great story, but that's for a different time, and I won't mention those things. In October 2016, the MPHP and the MHPP were recognized as safe harbor programs under Maryland law. When a physician or allied health professional can be referred to these programs where a mandatory report would normally be required to the board, the report need not be made provided no patient harm had occurred. This is another value to hospitals and practices across the state. To further expand our services, to broaden our reach regarding the helping of health professionals, we did create a third program, the MHPP. A lot of initials here, and people do get confused by them, but it's a program that helps allied health professionals who seek help privately on their own, not under the auspices of a board. We also work with acupuncturists, podiatrists, chiropractors, and veterinarians. Our goal is to continue to grow, and we'll be focused on other health professions. Some may not be seen as classical, fitting the classical definition of a healthcare professional, but clearly impact the delivery of healthcare services each day in the state of Maryland. As our journey continues, we look to grow and expand. We stand firm, however, and ever committed to our roots, to our original mission, and to the health and well-being of physicians in the state of Maryland. I wanted to talk briefly about our process. We receive referrals from multiple sources, hospitals, practices, attorneys, colleagues, family members, self-referrals, about a spectrum of problems. It can be substance use, psychiatric illness, behavioral problems, cognitive issues, occasionally physical problems are the reason for a referral. Intake forms are provided and completed to begin the process. A date is scheduled for intake. At intake, the participant meets with a clinical team with a lead clinical manager, a second to serve as scribe and an extra set of ears, and one of our medical directors. A tox screen is collected using an extensive medical professional panel. A full clinical interview is done. This is followed by collateral contacts and follow-ups with referral sources. From there, the collected information is used to develop a plan for ongoing treatment and monitoring. We do this as a team with everybody having input. If toxicology is a part of the process, a tox protocol is designed to meet the participants' needs. Randomization is not just about when, but also applies to the what. So we use a variety of medical professional profiles. Additionally, we randomize not just the when and the what, but also the how. While the primary medium is urine, we will also test using hair, nails, oral fluids, and blood. We also offer virtual testing and DNA-based testing options as well. This process includes regular meetings with clinical managers, treatment reports, reports from professional coaches, fellowship attendance. Followed over time, 6 months to up to 5 years and sometimes longer, we collect information that leads to a dossier documenting ongoing stable recovery. The program seeks to do this with respect for the participant while focusing on accountability. In closing, over my time here, I have worked with scores of physicians on the committee, brilliant men and women dedicated to helping their peers. I've also worked with 43 staff members, administrative and clinical. Our current team is one of the most talented, dedicated, and professional groups I have known in my 48 years in the addiction, mental health, and physician health worlds. It is my honor each and every day to work with them. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. I'll turn it back to Art.
Thank you, Mike. I guess everybody can tell that we're sort of scratching the surface of the kinds of things that we could inform you about, but it's better to have to be brief and then go on to the important things. Lastly, we have Dr. Barry Lubin, who is a board-certified addictions medical specialist, a fellow in the American Society of Addictions Medicine, who will describe using toxicology for the diagnosis and ongoing monitoring of participants in treatment. It's really an essential part of what we do and how we assess patients' progress and how we make meaningful recommendations to the participants in the program.
Thank you, Art. Good evening, everybody. I am Barry Lubin. I'm the medical director and medical review officer for the third-party administrator that MedCai is presently using for toxicology testing. First of all, I need to thank Marty, George, and Mike for their incredible talks preceding me. And then thank you all for inviting me to participate in this webinar this evening. It is my honor to be here, and I'm delighted to be here. I've been around the addictions field for 30 years plus, and the changes in toxicology have been incredible. And I may not be here to see the next 30 years, but I expect them to continue to grow and get better in what toxicology can provide. I know I'm talking to a lot of physicians. I'm not trying to talk down to anybody, but before I got into this business, I knew nothing about toxicology. and I'm a board certified internist. So that, let me say some basic things first. Firstly, toxicology is an incredibly complex science. The testing that is done for physicians and for other safety sensitive workers is not the testing you can buy at CVS to test your teenagers to see if they're smoking pot. That testing is done by immunoassay. Immunoassay testing is full of both false positives and false negatives. There's too much to lose. There's too much to unwind, if you will, in working with health professionals, airline pilots, other people, to depend on immunoassay testing. So the testing that is done is only reported as positive if, after screening by immunoassay, the test is then confirmed by either gas chromatography or liquid chromatography in conjunction with mass spectrometry. I'm a clinician, but what I've learned is that process essentially takes a fingerprint of the chemicals that are detected in the specimen. As Mike mentioned, we use multiple matrices for testing. The differences are significant. One of the most important differences is the window of detection back. Oral fluids look back 24 to 36 hours. Urine looks back 3 to 4 days. Head hair, for those of us who have it, looks back 3 to 4 months. Fingernails look back 6 months, and toenails look back a year. The other major improvement that happened in urine toxicology and drug screen monitoring is involving alcohol. Even amongst health professionals, as I think Marty mentioned, alcohol is still the most commonly abused, used substance. Prior to 15 years ago, monitoring for alcohol ingestion was extremely difficult and very poor, in my opinion, for several reasons. Again, I'm not trying to talk down, but hopefully you'll remember that the physiology of alcohol is that after it's ingested, it is rapidly excreted. So that testing for only urinary alcohol would only get somebody positive for urinary alcohol if they had been drinking within 12 to 18 hours of the test. So that window of detection was difficult. The other problem with urinary alcohol is that, particularly in diabetics, but also in other people, and now with the addition of the drugs that increase glucose excretion, alcohol can be produced in the cup after the urine has been voided, so that a positive alcohol and the donor of the specimen says, well, I didn't drink, but I'm diabetic. Well, again, prior to 15 years ago, we didn't know. If everybody told the truth, I wouldn't have a job. But the nature of addiction and the nature of the disease we're monitoring, people in recovery tell the truth, because honesty is the basis of recovery. People active in their disease, my former boss, Dr. Doug Talbot, used to say, you know when an actor is lying because his lips are moving. And in active disease, that is so true. In recovery, the opposite is true. But at any rate, what changed for alcohol monitoring, so about 15 years ago, we began testing for 2 metabolites of alcohol that are detectable in the urine. One is called ethylglucuronide, one is called ethyl sulfate. These substances will be excreted in the urine for up to 72 to 96 hours after somebody has ingested a significant amount of alcohol, or even a little bit of alcohol, so that window of detection became very expanded. Additionally, we're able, with ETG and ETS testing to differentiate the positive urine alcohol from fermentation, i.e. produced in the cup, versus ingestion. Because if the alcohol was produced in the cup, the metabolites are not going to be present. So the diabetic who has alcohol in his urine is going to be negative for the alcohol metabolites when we test that same urine. Then on top of that, about 10 to 12 years ago, we were gifted with another tool. Blood testing is valuable when you're in the ER and have a comatose, overdosed person. But as far as for monitoring, blood testing, again, with its very short window of detection, is really not particularly valuable, with one exception. That one exception is for a metabolite of ethyl alcohol, which is called phosphatidylethanol. Of course, we're doctors, so we call it a PETH test, P-E-T-H. Phosphatidylethanol, like ETG and ETS, are metabolites of ethyl alcohol. However, what makes it different from those two is that it's a big fat molecule, it's a phospholipid, and it's attached to the membranes of red blood cells. So people much smarter than I am have discovered that a phosphatidylethanol level of 20 or greater is present only, there's no other cause in the literature, only if that person whose blood was drawn has consumed a minimum of 7 ounces of alcohol in the preceding 2 to 4 weeks prior to the blood draw. And an ounce of alcohol is not 7 ounces of Robitussin. An ounce of alcohol, excuse me, is defined as a shot and a half of a spirit, a 12-ounce can of beer, and or a 5-ounce glass of wine. So if somebody has been drinking and again, most alcoholics, after they take the first one, can't really stop, which is what makes an alcoholic an alcoholic. So that the detection of relapse, as well as the evaluation of a new intake, is very much improved with periodic PETH testing. Okay? And again, sometimes when I give this talk, I say the title could be "What Goes In Must Come Out." We can test for essentially everything. The more unusual the substance, the less frequently it's ordered, the more expensive the test. But the routine panels for the common medical, common medical drugs of abuse, the routine testing for ethyl glucuronide and ethyl sulfate are very reasonably priced, in my opinion. That's just my opinion, but and PETH testing also reasonably priced. The world we're living in today, I'm not even going into the legalization of marijuana because that's a whole other topic, but the use of marijuana, the use of CBD, which is all contaminated with THC, the use and free marketing of legal Delta-8 THC. We have 2 other commonly abused substances that are legal, available on the internet, and available at every head shop known to God and man, are kratom, which is sold in every head shop and online. In small doses, kratom has a stimulant, cocaine-like effect, but in chronic high doses, it becomes an opioid type effect. Kratom addicted folks, when they get to treatment, require the same detox as a heroin addict. That's how powerful an opioid it is. There's another substance out there called tianeptine. It's sold as Tiana. Now, I thought Tiana was a Disney princess, but I've learned Tiana in the paraphernalia stores is this chemical called tianeptine. On the street, tianeptine is known as gas station heroin because, again, it has an incredibly powerful opioid effect. Because kratom, tianeptine, and delta-8 THC are not categorized as drugs. There is no FDA supervision. So the manufacturer of these drugs has no regulation. Many of them are manufactured in warehouses turned into factories, if you will, with no quality control. They're incredibly dangerous substances. The good news is we have finally gotten reasonably priced testing for those three substances. They're not on the routine panels, but case managers like Mike and the staff who works with him, they know if something's not kosher in monitoring a patient, they're going to get that special test. They're going to look for the zebras instead of just horses. And they're going to, their panels will reflect that. As the medical review officer, I'm there to advise and consent and help every way that I can in picking panels, picking matrices. The best monitoring, the gold standard in drug screen monitoring is urine. But when COVID hit and people were phobic about collection sites, we started using a lot of oral fluids, which were virtually observed so that we knew it was actually that person whose oral fluids we were collecting. And again, oral fluids, we have an excellent panel, but the window of detection is 24 to 36 hours for substance and only 12 to 18 for alcohol. So that's a limiting step with oral fluids. The DOT, who's the biggest provider of testing in the country, is finally looking at approving oral fluids for their monitoring programs. Because again, it's good and it's effective, but the window of detection rate limits it. So yeah, urine's the gold standard, but hair, preferably head hair for those of us who have it, because body hair prevents a whole other set of problems. But head hair, fingernails, and toenails are a valuable adjunct to oral fluid and urine drug screen testing, as of course intermittent path testing, probably more prevalent and more necessarily frequented for people whose drug of choice has been alcohol. But if we deal with very educated folks, and if they know they're just getting, if a participant just knows he's getting a drug screen and he was a benzo addict, well, I can't take my benzos, they might get me on a drug screen, so I'll drink. And again, I'm a recovering person. I know the way I think, and I'm no different than the other folks out there who have the disease that I have. So being able, I hate making this a gotcha game, okay? I don't like that part. However, we're twofold here, as been previously alluded to. One, we need to first and foremost protect public safety. And two, we need to protect the addict from himself and his disease, because this is a fatal disease. The number of overdoses, the number of suicides with drugs and alcohol are phenomenal. It's scary how prevalent this problem has become. And sadly, in my opinion, it's getting worse, not better, because of availability, because of the climate in which we're living, for multiple reasons. The opioid crisis killed a whole lot of people. And now opioid abuse has gone down, but cocaine has gone up. Working in addiction, I have job security for the rest of my life because it's not going to go away. And I know that. But as been said by previous speakers, prompt intervention, evaluation, treatment, and monitoring has two wonderful results. Again, protects the addict from himself and his disease and protects public safety. Okay. So I am very blessed to do the job that I do today, and working with people in recovery is part of the gift of my own recovery. It's not the solution for my own recovery. I do that as well. But working in this field, working with the professionals that I work with at MedChi and a lot of other programs across the country has been an incredible gift to me. And for that, I am really grateful. With that, I think I'm going to shut up and turn it back to whomever's doing Q&A.
Thank you, Barry. I think we will now do the Q&A, and I think Margaret will be the point person for that. And so we can go over to the kinds of questions and information that our audience has, and I hope that we'll be able to provide valuable input to that.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for all of the information, both about yourselves, your own disclosure, as well as the components that we see important in working with physicians who have substance use disorders, substance use problems. We heard from Marty and a bit from Barry about their own personal stories. Thanks very much to George for giving us some insights about the treatment components of things, to Mike about the history, which, without that, we wouldn't be here. And of course, to Barry for what I think is the most probably salient piece of this, or the real takeaway message, which is that this is for the protection of the individual who's dealing with substance use, but also the general public. And as physicians, as healthcare providers, that's what we are all here for. That's what we do. If you don't know me, my name is Margaret Crone. I am the program director for the Physician Health Program. I am going to conduct the Q&A. I do see that there is one question, but before we go into that, as everybody else is thinking about their questions, write it or, just raise your hand and we will call on you. I want to point a couple of things out that are in the chat. First off, Dr. Rockauer, when he made his opening comments, his remarks, talked about the BSO dinner and show. There is a link in the chat. So if you're interested, please come out. It's a great evening, and it will support the Center for a Healthy Maryland, which is obviously very important to us because that's what we're part of. The other thing that you're going to see in the chat is a link for the podcast that Dr. Rockauer and Dr. RUSINOWITZ did together. Dr. Rockauer has been doing podcasts now for about 2 years. Wonderful information, wonderful guests, Marty being one of them. So please check that out. Of course, the other link we put in there, I got to say, is for donations, right? Without all of your support, we wouldn't be here. So please take a minute to consider donating to us. A little bit, in the before everybody leaves, I'm also going to put in a link for the CMEs. It's a little bit new, and people will need to register in this particular kind of app to get the CMEs. Don't worry if you don't get it from the chat, no problems. I will send it to everybody tomorrow who is on the attendance list. So again, anybody who has any comments, Q&A, please let us know. I do have one thing in the Q&A that I did want to read, which I think is very important. I've been prescribed Suboxone since 2003. I practiced for 20 years, thanks to this medication and MedChi support. now retired and can finally admit to taking this life-saving medication. I urge MedChi and others to have this standard of care acceptable for practicing physicians, so we do not have to be treated in the shadows. I thank you all for saving my life and livelihood. Thank you for that testimony. Thank you so much. Any comments from our panelists?
Well, I would just like, I'm sorry, George, go ahead. You're muted.
You're muted, George.
Do you want to comment about that Q&A issue from the physician who disclosed? I think that's the sad story. You know, people such as Marty did recover without buprenorphine. It wasn't there, but there are people who don't. And you know, if you say 75% of physicians recover, 25% don't. That's a significant number. And as I said in my comments, I think it's an ideological issue. People who are maintained on buprenorphine within the recovery community for a long time were not regarded as really in recovery. It was distinguished from abstinent programs. My patients would go to Narcotics Anonymous, and they would be told they could not celebrate their anniversaries with other folks. It was a highly prejudicial piece that I think cost people lives. So I really appreciate that. I'm not sure if we disclose the name of the person that said that. If he wants to disclose himself, maybe he'll come on camera and say that. But I think that is. I have a lot of bitter feelings about the medical community not allowing their members to have access to that. And thank you for standing up and speaking out about that. I certainly, on my own, had to. I saw physicians who were referred to me outside of formal. They never got into difficulty, and I would treat them outside of the programs, and they would do quite well. But it was all, as this commenter mentioned, in the shadows. Barry, you're muted.
I'm muted. If I may, from my perspective, working with some 25 to 30 physician programs as well as nursing programs, similar number, many of them are monitoring folks on buprenorphine. Many of them will get periodic cognitive testing because, though it's thin evidence, obviously we need to be sure that there's no impairment as a result of the opioid agonist. But many programs, George, are permitting participants to be taking buprenorphine and are monitoring accordingly.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful that progress has occurred. I still take issue with the expense that physicians are required to go through cognitive testing. And the physicians who take benzodiazepines for sleep or for anxiety, I trust are not required to do that. So I think it's an ideological prejudicial piece still in my mind. But I'm glad that there's been that shift.
So we do have another comment here that kind of goes in the same theme. Thank you, Martin, for sharing your powerful story. I have a question for the panel about medication-assisted treatment. I'm wondering how you use Vivitrol and what your experience has been.
Well, I can just say as a neurologist and who's somebody involved with this, I think we all try and eliminate urges, desires people have. I mean, we have different brains. I think someday we'll understand it more, but I think my mu receptors, which receive opiates, are different. That may be the same as Barry's, but the rest of the crowd here, it's different. And I think, you know, when I was away at Farley, we called ourselves hydrocodonians because we were different. And I think anything we can do to eliminate the urge so that somebody won't relapse, that's what Vivitrol is. It's sort of a longer acting injection, I believe, that prevents the desire to get high, to find drugs, to escape reality. I just think it's so artificial to define somebody by the treatment they're receiving. You know, it'd be like saying, I very much think that the disease of addiction is very similar to diabetes, type 2 diabetes. You know, if you do what doctors tell you and you have reasonable medical management and you have some insight, you lead a pretty normal life. But if you don't give a damn and you relapse by not controlling the risk factors, then you're going to lose limbs and you're going to die early, and it's a miserable death. It's a death sentence. So it would be like diabetics saying, well, if we want to have a self-help group, but if you're on insulin, we don't really want to see you because you're really bad. And I think these are just dissecting little pieces of what make us feel good. And I think physicians as a group are the most narrow-minded people in the world. Maybe it's part of the training. I just don't know. But new ideas and new influences are extremely difficult. And there's also now a science of addiction. I mean, I was asked to tell my story. I had the easy part. I just told my story. The other speakers are very erudite and very sophisticated. And, whether it's the history or the present treatment of these diseases, it's now a specialty of medicine. And to ignore it or to say it's wrong is absurd. And I think, this notion, as George brought out, people who were on medication-assisted therapy, some of them are felt to cause problems with cognition taken long-term. That people on buprenorphine will get slowly, maybe demented more than the rest of us. As a neurologist, I can tell you I have some insight into how the brain works, and I think that notion is based on very little data. And the average physician who drinks much more than this is destroying many more brain cells. So, something's got to get you. And we're talking about doctors aging with time and their brains changing. I think hooking onto these notions of this therapy is bad because it may result in cognitive loss 20 years from now, and making that physician pay for cognitive testing every year is discrimination. It's just ridiculous. The number of doctors out there, I think it's frightening, the number that are doing a poor job, many of them because of substance use disorders. It's an epidemic.
So Marty, we do have a question that kind of dovetails into what you just said.
Margaret, before we move on, can I just comment about the Vivitrol question?
Yes.
Vivitrol is injectable, long-acting injectable form of naltrexone, which is a pure opiate antagonist, unlike buprenorphine, which is a mixed agonist-antagonist. I used the oral form of naltrexone from the time it came out in 1985 until 2003. And during that time, the number of overdose deaths from opioid overdoses was really unacceptable. Because what happens is when you take naltrexone, you increase your sensitivity to opioids once again, which gets decreased with use the way Marty described. So what would happen is that people would be abstinent for a period of time with naltrexone, and then when they'd stop taking naltrexone, if they relapsed, unlike, say, an alcoholic who relapsed, these people were resensitized and they would die. When buprenorphine came out, the number of overdose deaths in my patient population went dramatically down, and the long-term recovery it went up. Vivitrol is an excellent medication, but interestingly to me, it is much more widely used and of benefit to alcoholics because one of the effects of alcohol is it sets off an endorphin release. And by taking an opioid blocker, you block that release. So it decreases the incentive to drink. And many of my patients would go through the discomfort. It's a depot injection and it's quite uncomfortable. But patients, the alcoholic patients would value it. Vivitrol, in fact, the indication was changed so that primarily alcoholics take it at this point. Very few opioid patients take it. And I think buprenorphine is just so much more acceptable. So.
Thank you, George. Thanks very much. The next question is, and I see a hand raised as well. Do we have knowledge of the prevalence of addiction in the physician community, regardless of choice of drug?
Why would it be any different than the rest of the population? Unless it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, I don't think it is very different. I think the percentage is but we work in the candy store. And I think there's a certain small percentage of people that, get exposure to the drugs that might not have if they didn't work as a bartender or in the candy store. But I think the intrinsic disease is more prevalent. It's the same. The drug is different because the exposure is different. But I think they're pretty close, and I think we're arguing over 1 or 2% in the physician population compared to the general population.
There were some studies about by specialty. There were some studies about different specialists tending to get addicted to certain substances, and the most problematic group of anesthesiologists who had regular exposure to opioids, and including fentanyl. Fentanyl, which would volatilize. And part of the issue was if you're in recovery from opioid disorders and you're an anesthesiologist and you're in the OR, you're breathing in the fentanyl. And a number of anesthesiologists really were not able to return to their specialty because of the extreme exposure to that.
But I just want to say that I've heard, I think it was, maybe it was Art who mentioned a percentage of physicians that are potentially addicted. It's 14, 16%. I don't know how many physicians there are in Maryland. There are many who are not practicing, but there's certainly thousands. I don't know. I think 6,500 is the number that sticks in my mind. But just take that as 5,000, multiply that times 14%. In our combined programs, we have 100 doctors. We are not even scratching the surface.
Yeah.
It's frightening.
Yeah, that was my cursory review of the literature, was that doctors are pretty much the same as the general population, and overall addiction was approximately 16%, and 2/3 of that 16% was alcohol. So yeah, we're just scratching the surface.
So Marcia Wolf, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, I want to get, I'm sorry to switch the focus a little bit here, but I know the DEA can't, and the FDA can't chase every single product that has an opioid, an affinity for opioid receptors, but kratom's been around for a very long time, and so have some of these others. Why haven't they classified these? Barry, you're muted. There you go.
Yeah, the FDA recommended that kratom be made a class 1 drug. However, as a result of intensive lobbying by, if you believe it or not, there's an organization called the American Kratom Association, and their lobby led the charge to say that that was a terrible thing to do because kratom is valuable for people. You ready for this? The reason it's a bad thing to do is kratom is valuable for people in withdrawal. Hello? Because it's an opioid. However, again, you're a sophisticated group I'm speaking to. Politics and perhaps the power of the lobby prevailed. and kratom is still, again, a legal substance. Some states have made some laws to make them illegal in the state. However, they're still available on the internet for everybody. And tianeptine is fairly newer on the scene. Delta 8 has been available forever. Some states have made that illegal. So now the entrepreneur drug distributors have made Delta 10. It's whack-a-mole, which is a sad, I mean, what I'm telling you, I think is really sad. I mean, yes, I believe these things need to be regulated and controlled, but they're not.
But I also think part of the
reasons,
Marcia, is, that I worked at the FDA, and marijuana now, there are states that have medical marijuana and there are supposedly indications. Marijuana was decided that it was a drug by referendum. They asked people, would you like it to be a drug? And the majority said yes, so it's a drug. There's no other drug, medical product out there that has the name medical something that has not been approved scientifically. It's sort of, I'll regret saying this, but it's sort of like the way the Supreme Court is working right now. The hell with the scientists. We understand what they think and we understand controlled studies, but in our opinion, it's a drug. And there's an indication now because people have said there was.
Yeah, I mean, that's all, it's politics.
It is. The politicians have made that and decide what those indications are with no science behind it. There's science that marijuana is positive for chronic wasting disease, for cancer and HIV/AIDS, as well as the post-nausea chemotherapy, post-chemotherapy nausea. That's it. That's it. But the legislators say, well, it's good for PTSD, and it's good for chronic fatigue, and it's good. And again, this is all politics and, in my opinion, financially driven. That's just my opinion, because people are getting rich from growing and selling marijuana. The other thing I want to add to Marty's comment is, yes, it's the only medicine that you can't get at your pharmacy. You have to go to a dispensary. What does that tell us? It's not a medicine, in my opinion.
Thank you. We've got another question here. And I have to say this one is very near and dear to me because we're looking at this situation really closely. In my experience, there's very little education on treatment of addiction in medical school. I believe this causes two significant problems: that some of the most biased people about addiction are from physicians. That's one. Two, they are severely unqualified to treat addiction without additional training. Most of the education is provided through 12-step help groups and addiction treatment facilities. How do we go about fixing the stigma and improving the education? Excellent question.
Well, one of the things I do is I teach medical students. And so that becomes part of the discussions and part of what we talk about. I'm board certified in pain medicine. And of course, we all know that there's a crossover with addiction. And so I took a lot of the training for that as well. But and I made a commitment to teach medical students even after I retired, and I won't give it up. But there's some, I mean, you've got the academics on one side that are calling the shots. There's so much that needs to be in the curriculum that sometimes it gets shuffled into other subjects or other topics. And so it's, you do what you can, and then it would be nice to have an addiction education, but then who's, like you said, who's going to teach it? The physicians involved, the addictionologists, it becomes a means of making yourself available to them as well. As educators is what I mean.
I think it's a medical school by medical school piece, but I have taught medical students at Georgetown and in all 4 years for about 25 years. And they are generally quite receptive. What I found was that lecturing to them about how hopeful recovery can be didn't get through very much, but having them actually meet somebody in recovery is a very powerful experience. And Marty was good enough some years ago to come and speak to the second-year medical students that I was teaching, just to present his story. And that has a power much more than in the lectures. There's nothing like seeing somebody in recovery to really inspire a young medical student.
I also think early on, it's, giving somebody, naloxone or, and having them wake up, that's dramatic. And that makes a medical student sort of want to act. But, most of us are treating, if addiction is analogous to a cough, I mean, we're treating it when patients are on a ventilator, not when they present with a cough. And frankly, it's not, to me, it's not that interesting early on. And I think that's the problem with medical students. I think we're taught, to do something. We're taught to really act on certain diseases. And this one cannot be acted upon in that way until it's almost a terminal event. And I remember when I was in medical school, many years ago, alcoholism was discussed under community medicine. It was not part of the usual curriculum. And it was at 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon. We had a scribe service. We had 250 in my class. And there was one person there taking notes because nobody else cared. And
actually, they kind of flip things on their head now, at least at Hopkins where I teach. And they they spend a lot of time on motivational counseling. I mean, ostensibly it's geared toward diabetes and hypertension and diet and those kinds of things. But, it's very frustrating. The kids, they think it's great, but it takes a long time to get the patient to get anywhere with it because the patient originally they have to buy into it. And so they've kind of couched a lot of this into this motivational counseling sessions is where a lot of it winds up.
Thank you all for participating and paying such giving us such great support. I think we have one last question, which I have to say is the perfect way to wrap this up. What are starting steps that we can do to better support colleagues in or in need of treatment? Excellent question. Excellent. Well, and I'm going to jump in there and say, refer them to MPHP. If you are, I know that we have some folks that are not in Maryland, but every single state has a physician's health program. Refer them. We're here to help. But there may be some other things that the panelists want to say about that too. So I'm going to open it up, but refer. You can contact either Mike Lafrio or myself if you want to make a referral to the MPHP.
And I think it's important for somebody struggling, for their peer, their colleague, to let them know there's a difference between calling MPHP and calling the medical board. Yes. It is not a punitive, I'm going to take your license away phone call. Mm-hmm. And there's, from my experience, my own personal experience, I knew I was in trouble, but I wasn't going to tell the Florida Board of Medicine I was in trouble. I got intervened on by the Florida Impaired Network. My license was clean until I became non-compliant, and then, well, that's another story. But MPHP is not the board. They work with the board. There has to be a relationship, but it's not the board. So that first call and the initial evaluation into become a participant in MPHP is not a public record, and it is not license or discipline. Am I correct, Mike?
You are correct.
But it's voluntary, isn't it?
Yes.
How many of the physicians have to be confronted before they're willing to do something like that?
almost 100%.
And,
All right,
and
so I was going to say the first step is to confront your colleague.
So we have people who make the phone call and they'll say, I'm voluntarily referring, but almost all the time, somebody's hand is in their back or a foot somewhere else. But I mean, there's almost always coercion and a sense of people being compelled. But we just want to get them in the door, and then we can work with them from there.
But I think in answer to the question, one of the things we work on the most is educating clinicians, but more importantly is educating hospital administrators. You know, I think it's, if you see something, you need to say something, but who do you say it to? If you just have a suspicion, you know, you don't go to the board. If you think your neighbor is doing something funny, you probably don't go to the police because they are going to pursue it. But many hospital administrators have become much more sophisticated. They'll call this person in. They may refer them if they think there's a problem. And we do see people, you know, we see people, docs who have been pulled over with DUIs who are not alcoholics. They're just idiots. I mean, they just drank at a Christmas party and don't normally drink. And that's important to sort out. So I just, if you see something, say something. But, you know, unless it's heinous, you know, I think it's the kind of thing, unless you were going to call the police anyway, then find out somebody who has power and influence over the physician who is not a legal entity. And that's the best chance of getting them help once they get into our system. And I'll just say, I know we're ending, so I do this. I've given this kind of talk a number of times, and I have always given my cell phone number out. I can tell you, I've been doing this for many years. We've probably done 100 lectures, and only twice has somebody called up, but those two people are helped. If you feel like you don't even want to call MedChi because it's part of the system, it's 202-270-9127. Unless you tell me you're plotting to kill the president or the Pope, I will, it's confidential, and I'll give an opinion. And just as I had never met a doctor who was addicted to opiates, there are many people out there that are so alone that they would rather, frankly, die first. You know, they're not suicidal, but if death was the solution, not so bad. So it's very tough. So just help, try and help people. Thank you.
And, you know, I think also, I mean, everybody's made a good point with this. It's just, keep repeating the message, keep pushing, and then eventually it'll connect. So Steve, you had a question, and then actually a couple of other questions showed up. So if everybody's okay with spending a little bit more time with us this evening, I'd like to be able to get through those.
No, I was just going to add that, you know, many of our referrals come from the hospitals that they notice that they have a problem physician who's having difficulties, and they make the referral to us rather than going directly to the board. So that's definitely an easier way of getting treatment rather than having the hammer come down on you.
Well, as we often say, you know, call us first. Don't wait until the problem gets so big that the board is aware of it and is going to be doing something. And I do think that's, you know, that's a difficult thing for folks a lot. Folks just.
And we're not being devious. I can tell you what Margaret's saying, the board agrees with. The board is entirely behind this approach.
They would much rather you come, the Board of Physicians in Maryland would much rather you come to the PHP than end up with a consent order. Much. They've been amazingly supportive with that. So we have another question. Is there a certain minimum period of time needed before physicians return to work when recovering from addiction? Does return to work increase stressors that increase the rates of relapse, or does the return to work keep physicians from relapsing? What are your thoughts?
I think that's one that, you know, if you go back a few decades, there was a belief that, a year or two away from practice was necessary so that you could focus on getting sober. And over the years, we've learned that that really isn't accurate. Not everybody's able to go back to work right away, but everybody has their own individual illness, and the recovery plan has to be geared toward that. But there definitely is, I think, a drawback to just arbitrarily telling folks they've got to stay out of work. There are times when they really need to stay out of work, but most of the time that is not true. And it's a case-by-case basis. You really can't come up with a template and lay it on top of everybody and say, this is it, this is what we're going to do. It has to be individualized.
I also think George actually pointed out when he talked, it's decided individually, but it's a baby step kind of thing. You're not just done with treatment and you're fixed. It's not like receiving an organ transplant. It's very carefully monitored. So the decisions are made based on usually it's a schedule is cut back, so it's not as many hours, maybe not as much call. It may change the position the doc is in, but we really don't want to see him back. I mean, many would say, old timers especially, that relapse is part of the disease. That may be true, but really we don't want to see these people again. And we work very hard to work out a program so that they don't bite off more than they can chew until they're ready to go back completely. They're not cured, but they're in active recovery.
And I think this is one of those areas where you have to balance the good of the individual versus the public health issues. And it gets quite tricky. I personally think that most people find it therapeutic to return to work as a physician, and they find it very stressful to not work, but you have to make sure that they, in fact, are not endangering anybody when they do that. And some of it depends on what kind of work are they doing. And again, referring to anesthesiologists, I've found some anesthesiologists could not go back to work in their specialty, but they would go back to work using their medical skills in some other area. So it's highly individual.
I also think you have to look at the relationships that take place in the workplace. There are some docs who come to us who really are in toxic situations, and they're not really, recoverable, and it would not be good for them to go back into that soup. And we kind of help them to look at finding other places that they can work. So all those things have to be taken into consideration.
Okay, so we have another question actually about testing. I live in fear of false positives for alcohol and humbled that I'm still learning by researching before ingesting about new foods or substances to avoid. Chicken Madeira, balsamic vinegar, Purell hand sanitizer, vanilla extract syrup to flavor coffee. How likely is it that ingesting or using these substances could result in a positive urine? And then is there a list of substances, foods to avoid?
I think alcohol is ubiquitous in our environment. Those of us who are as old as I am know that soap and water still works. Hand sanitizer, when it became so prevalent with COVID, why it's a mixture of ethyl alcohol and isopropyl alcohol, I have no idea. It must have something to do with cheaper manufacturing, because again, as we all know, isopropyl alcohol is an effective antiseptic. The answer to the question about hand sanitizer is yes, through inhalation and transcutaneous transmission of the ethyl alcohol, an elevated ETG or ETS can be detected. The quantitatives become significant. We evaluate that. And again, the addition of PET testing, which is only positive if alcohol is ingested, not from inhalation or transcutaneous. Number one. Number two, as far as things like balsamic vinegar and kimchi, in order for those to cause a positive urine drug screen, we have to be eating quarts of kimchi. And my experience with kimchi is I wouldn't eat a quart of it. It's too spicy for me. And again, people in monitoring situations are given lists and instructions. Read the labels. Read the labels. When you go to a nice restaurant and you want to order chicken Madeira, waiter, is there alcohol in this dish? Yes, but it cooks out. That's a lie. No, it's not. Well, it might be true, but in order for alcohol to cook out, the alcohol has to be at 130 degrees for 20 minutes. I don't know about this restaurant's kitchen. My advice when I talk to people is you don't order those things. Poppy seeds, another ubiquitous substance in our environment. From poppy seed bagels to everything bagels, and now there's everything spices on everything because people sort of like it. Poppy seeds can cause a positive urine drug screen for morphine and or codeine. Okay? So again, MedCai participants, part of their contract says, I'm not going to eat poppy seeds. Okay? CBD, in spite of all the spam emails you get, none of available CBD product there is THC free. Even though, again, it's not FDA regulated, there's no quality control. So these CBD manufacturers can put whatever they want on their labels, but even the prescription CBD for the unusual pediatric seizure disorder has a percentage of THC in it. Hemp, which has had a rebirth in the environment, which supposedly is THC free, is not. So that hemp shampoos and hemp body lotions and hemp massage oils need to be avoided if you're being monitored. Because the truth is, the use of CBD, for example, I look at a urine drug screen and they have a marijuana metabolite. The levels from CBD are usually lower, but I can never say this was definitively from CBD and not smoking a joint. Similar with poppy seeds. The levels of codeine and morphine from poppy seeds are classically on the low side. But if someone took a Tylenol with codeine 4 or 5 days before the test, I could be looking at the same result. So again, people being monitored avoid poppy seeds. It's not such a hardship. You know, is it your medical license and your career or an everything bagel? Boom, boom. It's not a hard choice, in my opinion. Does that help?
You know, I do want to make one other point about our program, and I didn't even know people like Barry existed until I got this involved. We don't make decisions based on a blood test or a urine test. I mean, anytime something comes back questionable, we call Barry. And, you know, this is part of the service that's part of paying for these tests. I mean, he's not an angel. He is, but he's, you know, if we get a positive, we don't have enough education to sort out what it means. Barry calls every one of these individuals on the telephone to talk to them and find out when they drank, how many poppy seeds they ate, and try and make a scientific finding. Again, it's often you can't tell whether they had a poppy seeds this morning or a Tylenol number 3, 4 days ago, but he'll tell us that. I don't have enough, I'm not informed enough to make that decision. So, you know, it's like any other test. It's, you know, it's like in neurology, somebody getting an MRI scan. It's the interpretation of the scan that has meaning, not the film. And if you don't have people who know what they're looking at, it's pointless. And people can get in big trouble. There are people who've been told they have brain tumors when in fact they don't. So that's it. I don't think any other system besides our kind of program has that depth where Barry, in our case, calls every individual who turns up with something that is negative. And tries to sort it out. And often it's just, you know, we don't know enough about the test. And he'll tell us this was an immunoassay. It has no great meaning. And maybe they didn't do the chromatography because it was done in another lab. So that's another plus of what we do. No extra charge.
So we do have a couple more questions. I'm unfortunately going to have to say we probably just need to have time for one. Before we go into the questions, though, I do want to make sure that everybody has noticed that in the chat is the link for CMEs. It does look like it's a link just for doctors, but I've been on it myself. I am not a physician. I'm a social worker. I'm a licensed social worker and have been able to get CMEs through that. But if you have any questions about that, any concerns, please contact me tomorrow. Shoot me an email and I'll be happy to work it all through with you. So our last question for this evening, any thoughts about the role of GLP-1 agonists in addiction medicine?
It's very questionable. I was talking to a lead guy at NIDA last week, and there's a high level of interest and a low level of data. So check back in a year or so, and we'll see. We certainly need medications in addictions. So explore every corner.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for participating. Thanks for the great questions. I hope, a couple of takeaways here are there's a problem. There is a help for people who have that problem. We need to break down the barriers for people to get that help. The stigma, the concerns that, it's not really a problem, the denial, all of those sorts of things, talking to each other, listening to discussions like this, taking information back to your teams. All of those are ways to get the message out. I do want to also say that if you are working with a team and you would like for us to talk with your team to tailor a message that you think would be helpful, we're more than happy to do that and contact us about that. But otherwise, I do want to thank everybody for their participation. It has been a great evening, great response. And please look for future lectures from us. There'll be another one in May, and then our research symposium in October, and probably another lecture in June as well. Again, thank you so much, and have a wonderful evening, everybody.
And I'll reiterate, please donate.
Please donate. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.